For now, I am going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Samer Muscati, who is the Associate Director of Human Rights Watch. He's a lawyer, documentary photographer, and former journalist who has a background in monitoring and documenting human rights abuses. Over to you, Samer.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here today among all of you. During this discussion, we will explore how our incredible panelists are innovating to foster belonging in diverse areas and through partnerships. We will hear from our panelists about how the rights to belong critically underpins connections within and between communities to foster change. I'd like to start by asking each of our wonderful panelists to tell us their name, to introduce themselves, and also to talk about the inspiration for their work on belonging and where it comes from. Cliff, can we begin with you, please?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Wow. First of all, I need to comment about the people in this room and such amazing people, such amazing stories, and I just love hearing people's stories. And really, I'm all over the place in this environment, in this setting, because there's so many connections that on different levels with me, with almost every speaker that has been up so far. So my name is Cliff Fregin. I am Haida, indigenous from Haida Gwaii off the north coast of British Columbia. I am the eldest grandson of Earl and Sophie Parnell. That's my lineage, and my Haida name is Nan Kadinas, which means one who knows in our language. I want to talk a bit about, this is my first time in the belonging environment like this. I wasn't here in 2019, but I've been trying to belong all my life, it seems, and I think that's a story for a lot of people here. My mother, Verna, was a residential school survivor. I didn't know a lot about that, but a few years ago, she passed away 2 years ago, but a few years ago, she told me that she was on the front page of the Edmonton Journal when she was 8 years old. And it was actually her birthday. She was on the front page of the Edmonton Journal, arriving into Edmonton from the north coast to go to residential school. And she was at residential school for 5, 6, 7 years. She wouldn't really tell me how long. And then actually 9 years after she arrived, I arrived. So she was a young mom, and I spent the first 9 years of my life with my mom. And then I got fortunate enough to be dropped off at her parents' house on one of our many, many trips across this country as a young family. And I grew up with my grandmother and my grandfather for the rest of my life. I tell that because my grandparents had 13 kids. And I was the eldest grandson at the time, and I still am the eldest grandson. But eventually, myself and my 4 younger sisters, we all ended up with my grandparents because my parents were struggling in a different world in East Vancouver. And so that's that story. But the fact that, I grew up in a world where I watched people do heroin, where I watched, people overdose as a young age. I looked after my sisters, and out of the 13 kids of my grandparents, I say this about belonging, is we were the only kids in the family without parents. All my cousins had parents. We had grandparents. They had grandparents too, of course. I mean, our Sunday dinners were 50 people. So we were a big family. But the thing was, it was different with our family, with me and my sisters. And so it was always about how do we belong in that environment. And I remember one time, I'll leave it this story at this, because I believe we all have stories, and maybe I should have been on the story panel. I don't know. But I remember sitting my sisters down when I was probably 13, 14. We had a big family. Sitting them down, 4 sisters, and I said, look, we have to rise above. Everybody else has parents. We have to babysit. We have to do what we can to get what we need. And my grandmother was great, no doubt. She kept us together. But I realized that we need to overachieve. And that's how we grew up. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Lori, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, good afternoon. I have to say, first of all, that I am really quite blown away by this whole experience, as I would imagine that many of us are. It's a wonderful space, and so many seeds of change that are here. So I could start this in lots of different ways, but I guess one way that I think about belonging has something to do with a sense of voice. And so I grew up in a very loving family, but I had no voice in that family. I was the youngest of 4, and everybody talked over me, and it was frustrating. And so I was really quite shy the vast majority of my life, and I've worked very hard on that. And the other thing is that it was a comfortable middle-class family outside of Philadelphia. And the reason I say that is that I had no sense, because our family didn't really deal with issues, justice issues, for example. I had no sense of any of that until I started to do some volunteering. And the more I did, the more my mind just expanded and expanded and expanded. And then 37 years ago, I think it is, I set foot in prison for the first time, knowing nothing about prison, just what I had seen on TV or in the movies, with all the assumptions that we all carry. And I have been going in ever since. And it's a very odd thing, but I found myself talking earlier today with somebody saying, or maybe it was yesterday, I forget now, that I feel an odd sense of belonging in prison. And also, that sense of voice is something that I certainly have felt myself, but I've been able to create situations where people can develop their own voices. And so, 25 years ago, I founded the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program at the recommendation of a man, thank you, of a man serving a life sentence who unfortunately is still serving a life sentence. In Pennsylvania, when you get a life sentence, it's life without parole. I do hope that, I hope he can get a commutation at some point. But point being, it was his idea, and he just kind of threw it out into the universe, and I grabbed it and created this program, started it not as a program, started it as a class, one class. And I loved it so much that I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it, and then expanded it, and then it took on a life of its own. To the point now where, just to kind of bring you up to speed very quickly, we are in 15 countries. We have something like 1,300 people who have been trained. When I say people, I mean college and university professors who have been trained in our program. We have something like 60,000 alumni who have taken part in Inside Out. And I have to say that even though I've been there from the beginning, I am more amazed than anyone at where this has gone. It's grown organically, and it's just a very, very beautiful thing. I have learned so much and continue to learn so much through the program, and it stretches me all the time. So I am very happy to be here and be able to share some of this with you.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Angie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Samar, and thanks, Cliff and Laurie. My name is Angie, and the question, where did I find inspiration for this work, is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, belonging. Who am I, and where do I belong, and what does that mean to me? Right now, I feel like I belong with my fellow panelists here, and the way I like to position myself when I'm thinking about this is, where do I feel like myself? And part of it is my identity, and I'm a daughter, and I'm a sister, and I'm a friend, and I'm a wife, and those are all places that I belong. But what drove me to this work was a lack of belonging. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I was one of the only racialized kids where I lived. I got teased a lot. I didn't understand what was happening and why I didn't have friends. And I remember that moment when I was 13 years old and no one wanted to play with me. They told me to leave. And a fellow classmate came back from going home for lunch and saw I was by myself. And she stood up in front of the other 13-year-old girls and said, "Be nice to her. She's really nice. She's worth being friends with." And suddenly I belonged. And she changed my life in that moment forever. Suddenly I had value. I was seen, I was heard, and it drove me to get involved in volunteer work and in my community and to find ways to engage other young people so that they belonged. And so that was a formative moment. The other formative moment in my life actually relates to Laurie and her work, and it's such an honor to sit next to her. Years ago, I was invited as a human rights educator to participate as a guest speaker for the Inside Out program in a men's maximum security prison, and to talk about human rights. And I went in and I did my little thing on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and why rights matter. And one of the opening lines is, "All people are born equal in dignity and right." And I said that, as I often do. And at the end, these men came up to me and they said, "Thank you for saying that. Nobody ever tells us that we have dignity, that we are born with equal dignity. We are always treated like lesser than." And then they said, "And thank you for looking at us in the eye like we are normal, because other people don't do that." And I walked away that moment thinking, if one person in their life at any point saw them and heard them and said, "You belong, you matter," how could their lives have changed? And so what a privilege to have had that moment and to be sitting next to Laurie today. And that's where some of the inspiration for my work in belonging comes from.
Thank you, Angie. Destin, could you go next, please?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Very great and absolute pleasure to be in this space. I feel privileged, as a matter of fact, to have the opportunity to share a panel with these amazing people and to be in the space with such greatness and a passion for, I see it crazy. There's a lot of people, everyone here is aiming towards the same thing, which is a change, which is something that we all want. Now, coming to the question, who am I? My name is Destin. I am the founder, co-founder of the Black Creek Youth Initiative. It is an organization which is based in the West End of Toronto. If you watch the news, if you engage with any kind of news in Toronto, you would find out that a lot of statistics point to the areas of Jane and Finch and Jane and the Lawrence Heights to be one of the highest crime rates in the city of Toronto. If you look from what we call an index, I'm trying to situate the context of my work. It has been classified by Toronto's system as one of the most unlivable neighborhoods in the city of Toronto. And how did I find myself here? How am I passionate about this? 12 years ago, I would say, 10 years ago, I came to Canada as a refugee. I landed in Toronto, and when I got to this country, I actually didn't really have a plan. The only plan I had was to be safe. I was a journalist back home, and the conditions of my country was very, very unsafe. It is actually unsafe now. If anyone knows what is going on in Cameroon, in West Africa, you would know that the English-speaking territories of Cameroon are going through very, very violent attacks on a constant basis. It's unfortunate as well that the news doesn't report that, as I don't see that it's a very kind of hidden knowledge, which I was a victim of that at the time before coming to Canada. And so when I got here, the only plan I had in mind was to be safe. And you know, I remember the first day that I was walking on the streets of Toronto. You know, so when I came to Toronto, when I landed in Pearson Airport, I went to Montreal that same day because I didn't have anyone in Toronto. And so I spent about a month in Montreal and then came back with some distant family friend, which was really not a pleasant experience. And so when I came back to Toronto, I remember exactly, vividly, how that day went by. I got out of the couch terminal from Bay Street on the mega bus, and I had my bag, my suitcase. I was well dressed and I looked very happy, but I promise you, I had no idea where I was going to sleep that night. So walking on Yonge Street, I realized I seen a sign that said Newcomer Center, and that was the YMCA. I don't think I've told the story so much to the YMCA, but they should know that. I seen that sign that said newcomers. I didn't even read anything else. I just seen that there was some help there. And so when I went into YMCA, I engaged with some of the tools. I read some of the pamphlets. I actually was ashamed to tell anyone that I had no place to sleep that night. But there was I on the internet and browsing, trying to look for shelters, trying to look for where to sleep on the night. And I eventually got my hands on a pamphlet that was the 211 pamphlet. If you know the 211 number, when you dial that number, there's going to be an operator who would tell you, attempt to provide to you the different services that exist. And I remember I stayed on the phone for at least 3 hours waiting for an answer, because every shelter that I was able to call and they got back to me, I was not able to get into that shelter because I was not a permanent resident, I was not a Canadian citizen. So that allowed the 211 operator to send me into, you know, a very precarious, in a way more precarious condition. And so throughout that time, I spent over a year between shelter systems. A lot of shelters do know me from the time that I was in there. I actually do go back to the shelters to speak to some of the young people there based on some of my experiences which I had in the shelters. Covenant House is one of them. And thereafter that, I had the opportunity to be connected to a group of newcomers, to a group of young people who were facing the same things which I was facing. And so that to me was a revelation, that I could actually talk about what I was dealing with without being judged. And for someone, it was like I was bouncing an idea of someone else, and they went, oh, that happened to you, you were in hiding, you were locked up in jail back home, you were hiding before you came here. Oh, that happened to me too. I walked over 3 countries before I got here. And so talking to these people, it was just like, oh my God, there's so many people going through these things. And at that time, coming to Canada, I just finished my degree in journalism. And when I got here, I made, and keep in mind, you know, it's a story for another day, but my immigration process did take at least 5 years. So I ended up getting my residence and accepted into the protected class of Canada in 2018. And so thereafter, that is when my aha moment took off, and I was able to get into school. I was very, very passionate about going to school, and that year as well, I got into university. I started my degree in human rights and equity studies, and as well, I founded the Black Youth Initiative, which was an essence to give a space for young people who do not have, the opportunity to operate at their optimum potentials. And so this space creates it creates a space where young people, where we do different kinds of programs really related to art-based activities particularly. And it's a means, it's a means for these young people to have a space that they can feel heard and feel welcome and feel the sense of belonging. So that's where I come from.
Thank you, Destin. It's really wonderful that you've shared all your inspirations. Hearing you all speak is completely inspirational to me, and I'm sure to everyone else in this room. I'm going to ask one other question before we open up the panel to questions from the audience. But could you let us know how networks, partnerships, and cross-sectoral collaborations helped you to build belongings initiatives and amplify impact at a systems level? Lori, do you want to take that on first?
Can you just repeat the last part again?
Sure. How have networks, partnerships, and cross-sectoral collaborations helped you to build belonging initiatives and amplify impact at a systems level?
Okay. Am I on? Okay. So let's see. The partnerships that we have in Inside Out are on a number of levels, but I should probably explain first what it is that we do, very simply. We take college students into prisons and jails and study together with people on the inside. What we do not do is we don't go in and study people, we don't go in and help people. It's not advocacy, it's not activism, it is literally people coming together as equals, studying together, studying all sorts of issues. I happen to teach criminal justice, so that's what we study. But over the years, all kinds of people from all sorts of disciplines have gotten involved. And so the many levels of partnership, there's the partnerships between, two kind of, and I'm talking from a United States perspective, but I think this is probably true for many countries, two pretty powerful systems, the educational system and the correctional system, and bringing those two together and getting buy-in from both of those very large systems has been really kind of amazing to watch. And the more that it happens, the more that it grows. And we haven't had, thankfully, any serious problems, so that makes a big difference. I mean, we have very strict parameters around our program, and that is what has made it safe going into the future. So there's that level. There's also the level of the instructors from all over the place, as I said, in many kinds of schools and many disciplines, getting really jazzed up about doing this. And so there's that partnership with us as the Inside Out Center. And then there is the very on-the-ground partnership between and among the people who are in the actual classrooms. And that's what we do. I mean, the way that we do these classes is completely dialogic. It is always in a circle. People sit alternately, inside student, inside, outside, around the circle. And it is dialogue throughout the semester, either in the large circle or in smaller subgroups. And everyone's equal, everybody does the same work, etc. And all I can say is that the power of what happens in there, because it is a partnership of equals, and that's the key, the power is amazing. I mean, it is, and I'm only saying this because people have told us over and over, it is life-changing for people, for inside and outside students both. It's really quite something. I mean, nothing that I could ever have imagined. I mean, it's kind of always a delightful, recognition or whatever for me to see or to hear from people, what's, what they've gone through in the class, and the impact that it's had on their lives. And so, like we have one gentleman who, and this is a really amazing story, I think. He used to be, so in the United States, there are these two very large gangs called the Crips and the Bloods, and they started in LA. He grew up in the family that started the Crips, and he was deep in that whole drug culture for many years, ended up in prison. His name is Kenny. Started to take inside out courses, and then one of our instructors got in there and started to build a whole program, a degree granting program, which is very out of the ordinary for our program. But anyhow, Kenny was in the first group to go through. He graduated. He finished his degree at Pitzer College, this tiny little college out in California, and then he got a Fulbright scholarship to go to Uganda to study their prison system there. It's like, wow, look at the arc of, that's one person's life. It's amazing. So, I don't know, I have a million stories, and that's the only one that I'm going to tell you at this moment. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you, that was amazing. Destin, can you go next?
Yeah, you know when, sorry, can you repeat the question so I can phrase, I can be in the context here?
Sure. How have networks, partnerships, and cross-sectoral collaborations helped you to build belonging initiatives and amplify impact at a systems level?
You know, the first thing I'm going to say is that you can never walk alone. It's impossible. You can never walk alone. And it's very important to take note of the partnerships or of the connections that we make. And, you know, for me, I see part of what drives community and what drives mankind is hope. And what is hope? Hope is really, you know, our ability or our potential to connect with is, you know, it depends on the connections that we have around us, be it physical, social, spiritual connections. And so once those connections are in place, the probability of hope is higher. And so, you know, on a personal basis, I'm a very positive person, and it gives me the strength to do to be in this field. However, I have seen firsthand with my work how, you know, these partnerships, this creation of spaces where young people can be heard, have directly or indirectly impacted systems. You know, I think about a young person who I was speaking to last week, and you know, so one of the things which I do is I'm an instructor at Seneca College as well. So I did tell this young person I teach, and the first thing the first thing she went was, "So you're telling me I could go to college? Can you get me in?" Right? That young person comes from a family. It comes from a family where there are 9 siblings, and none of them has been able to graduate high school. And so to them, it just doesn't feel like that is a possibility. And so once we're able to create spaces and connect them to culturally sensitive spaces where they can see themselves in these abilities of improvement, in these abilities of progress. You know, last week I was watching something and I seen a guy from Cameroon. Do you guys know this Shark Tank stuff? The Shark Tank, you pitch in your stuff and they go, "Whoa, that's crazy." I seen a guy from Cameroon do that and I was like, whoa, a man from my country a man that looks like me can actually go and present something based on the facts which I actually know. You know, it was just like, you know, for me, it was really just validating some of the things which we take for granted. Right, and I bet you, you know, that video, it was a small video, it went through a lot of our forums, it went through a lot of our, you know, WhatsApp groups and forums and all of that, and I promise you that was very, very impactful, you know, for a young person or from someone who doesn't see representation, who doesn't see a possibility in, you know, I was looking at something there, I wasn't here yesterday, but I seen something that says, you know, I want my daughter to dream of being the president and not the president's wife, right? You know, I don't want to I don't want these young people, and that's the essence of why, we do this work, because these young people now can see themselves in these positions where it seems impossible. So to me, that is challenging. That is challenging the system. That is challenging stereotypes. That is challenging, if you come from my neighborhood, I'll tell you this, right? It has been so stereotyped that if you come from this neighborhood, it is possible to not have a job because of your postal code. It is possible to be refused a loan in the bank because of the postal code. So I started telling them, do not put your address on your resume anymore, right? So, I personally, I think that connection, we can never walk alone, and having the right set of partnerships and making proper, genuine connections with those who actually do care is everything, and is what needs to get us on the right direction.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cliff, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Sure. Wow. Okay. So I went through the story myself, but fortune would have it that my whole career has been about capacity building for Indigenous people.
Right.
For Indigenous people, for Indigenous organizations, for Indigenous communities. I have just, fortunate, lucky, whatever the case may be, I have been put in positions to affect that. Within my community, within the province, nationally. I ran a trust fund as an executive director on Haida Gwaii. In 1995, I was the executive director of a $40 million trust fund between the Haida people and the non-Haida people. That was the first time they ever had to come together to do anything together on that island. And so I was part of that process of getting them to work together. And then I went nationally with a Aboriginal Financial Institution, COO, in Ottawa. Did that for 4 years, and I came back to British Columbia to set up and run a $100 million trust fund for BC First Nations, 203 BC First Nations. And I got to build capacity. I got to bring partners in. I got to set up a clean energy fund for First Nations. I got to do scholarships and bursaries. Did that for 13 years, and then now I'm the COO of Indspire, which is an Indigenous charity that does scholarships and bursaries across Canada for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And we're a top 10 charity in the country and a top 5 youth charity. And you just got to pinch yourself. How did this happen to me? That's what it's all about for me, is building capacities and building partners and bringing them together and getting some results. So last year, best year for Indspire, $23.1 million across Canada, 6,900 awards across Canada. I said that to someone yesterday, and I said, yeah, but we had 10,000 applicants, and it's growing. The applicants are growing, and they said to me, that's excellent, 70%, you're getting 70%. And I was like, yeah, but what about that other 30%? That was my thinking on it. I want to just go into, that is what I've done, and I've assisted, not because of me, but the situation I'm in, and there's a lot of similarities with youth, Indigenous youth across this country, especially inner city youth, as well as Indigenous youth, as well as coming from communities where they've never been to a big city, they've never been to university or college, and so in some small way I've been able to support that. About 15 years ago, I started with my former boss not an organization, but an event called the Young Entrepreneurs Symposium, which is for Indigenous youth 19 to 35. And before the pandemic, we brought 200 of these people across Canada together. And the majority of them came from small communities, really small communities, isolated communities. And you could see, it was a 3-day conference. We'd put them into teams. They would work in a team environment, work on some entrepreneurial strategies. And the first thing we did with them was in a circle, 200 of them in a room, introduce themselves. And the first time they ever spoke in public, 90% of them. And in 3 days, you could see the change. The change happened in 3 days. And it happened because the people they were in the groups with and the whole group inspired them. They saw people succeed where they never thought they could succeed. And so the actual confidence coming out of that event, we had one speaker who owned a newspaper say to us, these young kids are too high. They're too, flying high coming out of this conference. What are you going to do about that? I was like, nothing. Let them be confident. Let them go out there. We have plenty of those young people now that are running businesses, but more importantly, we have chiefs from those groups. We have people running corporations. We have people running stores. We have people running programs. It's amazing to see. We have social media. This is before my time too, but social media influencers. Just to see that has been amazing.
It's amazing. I know we're supposed to move on to questions and answers from the audience, but I did want Angie to give you a chance, please, to jump in on that question as well, please.
Sure, thanks. I'll try to be quick. I just want to acknowledge that, Destin, you talked about hope, and yesterday we talked about joy. So, how do we bring hope and joy and belonging? And just a shout out to Ola, whose daughter is going to be president one day, which, we're all, if we could all vote, we're going to vote. But to answer your question, in the few seconds we have left, at Equitas, we really work using human rights education as the foundation for social change. And when we talk about networks and partnerships and how we aim to have impact with them, we really look at it from 2 different areas of work. The first area is, how do we do it in the front lines? How do we work, similar to you, we are capacity building. So how do we work with the people who are working on the ground to build their capacity to use and harness the power of human rights to empower particularly young people to lead that social change? And we got to work with Destin for many years on the front lines and see that change. The other area is, how do we work with the system? We know we can't just work with the front line, because if there's no support from above, that can feel you're pushing against a system that's not working. And so how do we work with the system as well? But we can't also just work with the system to impose things on the front line. They have to happen together. So we really look at how we do that together and how we can bring human rights to that. And a really quick thing that talks about how we can lead to partnerships and systems change. So we've been doing all this work, and one of the core areas of human rights is non-discrimination and anti-racism. And we could see that there was this momentum happening in British Columbia with the Ministry of Education for anti-racism. And we reached out to our networks and our partners and we said, we want to help. We want to help. We don't know how to get in, but we want to help. And we let our networks and our partners help push us forward to the Ministry of Education, where we had the opportunity to partner with them to help lead them to implement an anti-racism action plan using human rights as the foundation. And so we brought together networks within that system to start to say, what are the actual changes that need to happen to have an anti-racist education system that goes beyond the curriculum, that goes to the entire environment itself. And then the other thing we did is think about who are on the front lines, and those are children and youth. And so how do we bring children and youth to the table? For the first time ever, the Minister of Education last year spoke to children and youth because we brought that systems level, the front line with the systems level together, and they changed their entire action plan based on what those young people were saying. They sped it up because the Minister of Education finally heard from the front lines and went, oh my God, children are being hurt. And we need to do something right away. And so I think that's, if I look at how we work in partnerships and networks, it's by working with them and looking at those different elements of the systems to lead to impact.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks.
So I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. If anybody has a question.
They might have the answers too.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
Very important. Why do we keep running negativity on the news when we know that if we run them, other people are gonna get the same idea and do the same thing? Okay, you reported one time, that's enough. Why can't we move on and show the good thing like this? This is good. This is gonna help somebody. Oh, I can do that. Look at Tony. Look what he do. He's in a wheelchair. But I found that negativity is running more than people who are doing things as is good. And I want to know why is that?
So I'm not sure if anybody wants to.
So,
Don't mind.
You can.
I'll ask for a recap of the question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I would ask for a recap
Yeah.
of the question. Thank you.
Sorry, to repeat the
I would
question.
want a recap.
Yeah,
of it
if you could please repeat the question. Sorry.
from anyone who.
why is
We keep running negativity on the TV. We hear it one time, and then we hear it again and again and again. One time is enough, but when you let people hear it over and over, then somebody else is gonna get the same idea and do something the same way. Instead of running negativity on the news, why can't we have positive stuff like this?
oh,
Thank you,
Thank you.
by the way, for that question. And that is very true that we should have much more positivity than negativity. I did mention, even where the Black Quid Youth Initiative is located and situates its work is this area that has been stereotyped. If you watch the news, it's all about, you see how they represent the faces on the news. It's always, it feels like it's sad to watch the news, and it is true. What we need is things like this. We need is opportunities to engage in very positive conversations. If we have the opportunity to have these kind of conversations in our dinner tables with our friends, because this is where it begins from. It begins from charity, it begins from home, to start talking about these things in a very positive manner. So it's on the news, it's no way to go. I can tell you if it makes anything better, I don't watch the news.
Please.
I would say, for whatever reason, sometimes people are attracted to negativity in the news. And I'm not sure what that's feeding, but it's feeding something. And beyond that, I think there's a laziness that's involved. It's easier to be negative than to be positive, because to be positive, I believe, you can't just think positively, it has to emit into action as well. But it's real easy to sit back and be negative, and throw slings and arrows, because that doesn't, nothing is expected of me then. That's part of what, and if on the news, they're trying to sell whatever is sexy, and so, the people in newsrooms always say, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's what's going to make them money.
Can I just add, they're trying to sell something sexy. Let's make belonging sexy and connectedness sexy, but also like, that's not actually what I was, like that, you just triggered that in me. And now my friends are like, oh God, what is she doing? But also just a challenge, you know, to the point that Tony made, we don't talk about this enough. So if each of us leave here today and talk about something we learned with 5 people and the importance of what we learned, and even if one of those 5 people takes that message forward, we can create some momentum. And I think if, as a society, we demand it and create momentum on wanting positivity and wanting these good stories, and not the if it bleeds, it leads. Like if it's hope, I can't think of a rhyme for hope, but if it's hope it leads, then maybe we can change that narrative. And so it's kind of a little challenge to myself that I'm going to go and tell 5 people about this, and I hope others do the same, because maybe we can take responsibility for changing the story.
Angie, I think you want to say if it's hope, it's dope. That's the language you want to use.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's it.
But just to echo in terms of the negativity as well, what a barrier it is to open to sort of inclusiveness and to belonging. I mean, each of you are dealing with this challenge of whether it's Indigenous rights, whether it's prisoners' rights, whether it's migrants and refugee rights, dealing with a really negative narrative that comes through the media, and how important it is to counter that. I think we have room for one more question. Maybe I'll take it from the gentleman in the back wearing the blue.
Yeah, considering that systems have placed so many barriers, such as like the cutting of legal aid funding, like in British Columbia, or even like other barriers like Indigenous and Black youth disproportionately like in foster care and prison still like in Canada, like relative to their population, I guess what can the community like do on the ground, I guess, in the face of these like institutionally created like barriers to belonging?
Wow, that's a good question. Okay. Yeah, well, it's a little BC focused, so we've got a little, but you know, I think it's about coming together and working together to advocate for change. I don't think any of us can do this on our own. You know, I couldn't have had access to the inner system of the Ministry of Education to push, and I'm doing a lot of pushing in uncomfortable situations there, if I didn't have the networks backing me up and people saying, this is someone who can help you do this work, and if I wasn't approaching it in a spirit of collaboration with the people at the Ministry of Education. And so I think there are so many barriers, but if we come together and work collectively with one voice and harness the power of hope and energy and togetherness and ask for change together, I think there's possibility there. And I know even Cliff and I at lunch were like, okay, we're gonna get a coffee because there's things we can do together. So that's what I have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah, solutions, going with solutions rather than a negativity. I mean, talking about positivity, right? How can we work together on this and move the needle? And I think, you know, yesterday when the question came up, you know, that passionate young lady came up yesterday, and you know, and I thought to myself, you know, it is about hope. It is about, that's why I'm here. I mean, I wouldn't be trying to do the things I do if I didn't have that hope of something better for my kids and youth and society.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah, of course, Laurie.
In relation to this. I think it's about multiplying our efforts. And one of the things that I find in our program at the end of the semester, there's a lot of sadness that happens. And at first, as I experienced this, I thought, well, the sadness is because people are not going to see one another again. But I came to something deeper a few years later, that actually what people are going to miss is the space that we created together, that was a very generative space that helped people to invite the best out of one another. And so what I always tell people at the end is, it would be unfair to leave this as just a nice memory. We need to create these spaces in the world because the world needs it. And yesterday I made this connection between belonging and longing. And I thought, yeah, we are longing to belong. Every one of us is. And I thought that it was like this little beep in my head. Anyhow, that's all.
I think those are beautiful words to end our conversation on. If I could ask people to join me in a huge round of applause to our fantastic panelists. Thank you very much. It's wonderful.